I am a 28-year-old sous chef. My life revolves around late nights, high-stress kitchens, and coming home to absolute silence around 3 a.m. My studio apartment is small, but it is my sanctuary, especially the kitchen. I am fiercely protective of my tools. Heavy cast iron, deeply seasoned black steel skillets, and a modest turntable where I play old jazz vinyl to unwind after a shift. Because of my brutal hours, my parents have my digital door code. It was a practical arrangement so they could water my plants when I worked double shifts. Looking back, that was my first mistake. The weirdness started a month ago, right at my stove. One night after a grueling 14-hour shift, I reached for my favorite carbon steel pan, a beautifully blackened, heavy-duty piece of metal. It wasn't there. In its place sat a lightweight, pastel pink non-stick skillet. I stood there staring at it in the dim light, my brain sluggish from exhaustion, wondering if I was losing my mind. A few days later, my glass jars of imported whole spices vanished. They were replaced by neat plastic containers of chia seeds and organic oatmeal. I called Mia, a close friend who handles front of house at the restaurant. "Hey, did you borrow my black skillet the last time you stopped by?" "No," Mia said, sounding puzzled. "You never let anyone touch that pan. Why?" When I brought it up to my mother the next day, she just laughed it off. "Leo, you work until dawn," she said smoothly. "You're just sleep-deprived and mixing things up. You probably bought that pink pan yourself." I wanted to believe her, but the pink pan felt too real. The changes didn't stop in the kitchen. The following week, the living room was hit. My mahogany turntable and my entire collection of jazz vinyls, years of hunting through dusty record crates, were completely gone. In their place sat a low wooden bench with a pristine white meditation cushion, an essential oil diffuser puffing out a stream of lavender mist, and a neat stack of books about finding inner peace. Even the air felt alien. Someone had unscrewed my warm, dim light bulbs and replaced them with sterile, blinding white LEDs. Walking in after a long shift felt like stepping into a hospital operating room rather than my home. My girlfriend, Alana, came over that Tuesday evening. She stopped dead in the doorway, blinking at the harsh lighting and the pristine white cushions. "Did you secretly join a cult, Leo?" she asked, trying to laugh but looking genuinely concerned. "Or are you just going through some extreme minimalist phase?" I just stood there like a stranger in my own apartment, utterly unable to give her a coherent answer. She left early, clearly weirded out by my blank reaction. By the next morning, a deep, suffocating panic had set in. I knew I hadn't bought a diffuser. I knew I hadn't boxed up my Miles Davis records. I started obsessively Googling symptoms of early-onset dementia, my hands shaking over the keyboard. I even sprinted to the hardware store down the street to buy a carbon monoxide detector, utterly convinced a silent gas leak was making me hallucinate and forget my own actions. The detector read a perfect 0. Terrified that my own brain was breaking down and that I could no longer trust my own eyes, I sat down on that strange new cushion, opened my laptop, and typed out a frantic post on Reddit, begging strangers for help. The Reddit comments saved my sanity. They urged me to buy hidden cameras immediately. I felt paranoid, but I bought 2. One disguised as a dummy smoke detector on the ceiling, the other built into an air purifier facing the kitchen and living room. 2 days later, during a chaotic Friday night dinner rush at the restaurant, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. A motion alert. I stepped away from the kitchen line, ducked into the walk-in cooler for privacy, and opened the live feed. My chest went tight. It was my parents. They walked through my front door carrying large cardboard boxes, acting completely at home. They worked with an eerie, quiet efficiency. My mother unhooked my dark, abstract artwork from the walls, wrapped them up, and stuffed them unceremoniously into heavy-duty trash bags. In their place, she hung pastel still-life canvases. Meanwhile, my father pulled out a cordless drill. He began mounting floating shelves onto my wall, carefully arranging small white porcelain angel figurines on them. They spent over an hour meticulously wiping my presence from the space. I stood frozen among the crates of vegetables in the cold room, watching my own mother smoothly dismantle my life on a 5-inch screen. I wasn't losing my mind. I saved the footage, closed the app, and walked back out to the kitchen, my hands gripping my chef's knife with a freezing clarity. I drove to my parents' house the next morning, the video files saved on my laptop. When I walked into their kitchen, my mother was pouring coffee. I didn't say good morning. I just set the laptop on the counter and pressed play. They watched the footage of themselves stripping my walls and bagging my belongings. My mother didn't gasp. She didn't look ashamed. Instead, she tightened her robe, crossed her arms, and looked at me with deep disappointment. "You spied on us, Leo. On your own parents?" My father sighed, setting his mug down. "We didn't want you to find out this way, but you left us no choice." Then came the twisted logic. My mother explained with absolute calm that my younger sister Clara was suffering from severe burnout from her job. They had decided on their own that Clara needed to move into my studio apartment for the next 6 months to heal. "But your place, Leo, it's so depressing," my mother said, waving her hand as if my taste in decor was a physical disease. "All that heavy black steel, those dark jazz records, it breeds negative energy. Clara needs healing, peaceful environment. She needs light colors, zen spaces. We were just doing the heavy lifting for you so she could transition smoothly." I stared at them, my voice tight. "You altered my home, made me think I was losing my mind because you decided Clara is moving in without ever asking me?" "She is your sister, Leo," my father said, using that heavy, unyielding tone he always used to make me fall in line. "Family steps up when someone is drowning. You have the space, you're barely there anyway because of your restaurant hours." "It's my apartment, I pay the rent," I said, the anger finally breaking through. "Clara is not moving in, and you are never stepping foot in my home again." My mother's eyes instantly welled with tears, perfect practiced tears. "How can you be so cold? Your sister is broken, and you're throwing a tantrum over a few pans and old records? A good son protects his family, Leo." "Give me my things back," I said, slamming the laptop shut. "Every single piece, or I go to the police." My father stood up, his face reddening. "You wouldn't dare humiliate this family." "Try me." And I walked out into the cold morning air. I went home that afternoon and immediately changed the digital lock code, wiping all saved fingerprints. I felt an instant wave of relief, but the peace was short-lived. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with alerts. Someone was repeatedly entering the wrong code at my door. I pulled up the camera feed to see my mother holding a large thermal container of soup. When she realized her access was gone, she didn't call me. Instead, she sat right down on the hallway floor and began weeping loudly, ensuring my neighbors heard every sob, until the building manager finally had to ask her to leave. Next came the battle for my belongings. When I texted my father demanding my cast iron pans and vinyl records back, his reply was ice cold. They had already thrown the clutter into a commercial dumpster. I knew it was a lie. My mother never threw away anything of value. I spent the night browsing local secondhand marketplace apps using a burner account. Sure enough, I found them. My rare Miles Davis and John Coltrane pressings were listed under a profile using her first name and a photo of her cat. She was selling my history for pocket change. I screenshotted the listings and sent them to my father. "You have until noon tomorrow to return every single item to my building's front desk, or I am taking the security footage and these screenshots to the police for theft. I don't care about family pride anymore." The threat worked. The next afternoon, while I was at the restaurant, the building concierge texted me. My things were dropped off via a courier service. There were no boxes or protective wrap, my records were shoved carelessly into plastic grocery bags, and my seasoned pans were rattling around loose in a plastic laundry basket. They were scratched, but they were home. It was a petty, passive-aggressive surrender, but it was a victory. The smear campaign began at my grandparents' golden wedding anniversary the following month. I almost didn't go, but I refused to let my parents turn me into an outcast by default. The moment I walked into the private dining room of the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted. The usual warm greetings from my extended family were replaced by tight smiles and hushed whispers. I was barely at the buffet before my Aunt Susan cornered me, her face a mask of solemn disappointment. "Leo, we heard about what happened," she whispered, shaking her head. "Clara is going through a breakdown, and you changed your locks on her? She's your little sister. How can you be so heartless?" I looked past her.
Across the room, my mother was holding a glass of wine, surrounded by two other aunts. She was speaking in low, tragic tones, occasionally dabbing her eyes with a napkin. She was playing the heartbroken mother of a selfish son, rewriting the narrative to save face. I didn't argue with Aunt Susan. I didn't lose my temper. Instead, I walked over to the corner of the room where a large presentation TV was set up. My cousin Marcus was managing the laptop that was supposed to play a nostalgic family slideshow. "Marcus," I said, plugging a USB drive into the side of the machine, "play this file first." "What is it?" he asked. "Just hit play." The screen blinked. The old photos of my grandparents vanished, replaced by the crystal-clear, high-definition footage from my smoke detector camera. The dining room fell dead silent as the entire family watched my mother systematically strip my apartment walls, tossing my personal belongings into heavy trash bags, while my father drilled holes into the drywall. The clinking of silverware stopped entirely. My mother's face drained of color, the glass trembling in her hand. My father stared fixedly at his shoes. The suffocating silence was broken by my Uncle David, who let out a sharp, sudden laugh. "Good God, Beatrice," he said to my mother across the room. "You're still doing this? I thought you stopped after you cleared out my garage 20 years ago." My grandmother, my mother's own mom, walked over to me, patted my arm, and whispered quietly, "Good for you, Leo. Your mother has had a control problem since she was 10. It's about time someone locked her out." For the first time in my life, the illusion of my parents' absolute authority was shattered. They weren't protective elders, they were boundary crossers, and the whole family now knew it. They left the party early, slipping out the back door without looking at me. But the most important shift happened later that evening. As I was driving home, my phone rang. It was Clara. I braced myself for an argument, assuming our parents had already poisoned her mind against me. Instead, her voice was completely hollow, shaking with a mixture of shock and anger. "Leo," she said quietly, "I just saw the video Marcus forwarded to the family group chat. What exactly did Mom tell you about me?"
I pulled over to the side of the road, the engine idling in the quiet night. "She told me you were having a breakdown, Clara," I said. "She said you needed to move into my place for 6 months to heal." Clara let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "I just got promoted 2 weeks ago, Leo. I bought a new car last month. I am perfectly fine. I never asked to move into your studio. I didn't even know she had a key to your new place." Then her voice dropped, becoming small and brittle. "But Leo, something else is happening, and watching your video made my blood go completely cold." She explained that for the past 3 months, things had been shifting in her new apartment, small details. Her bold, abstract architectural sketches kept disappearing from her drafting table, replaced by pastel landscapes. Her favorite vintage leather jacket vanished from the closet, swapped for a beige wool coat. She thought she was just exhausted, misplacing things in the chaos of moving. Until 2 days ago. She came home early with a migraine and found our mother in her bedroom. She was actively boxing up Clara's collection of graphic novels, replacing them with white linen curtains and vanilla-scented candles. When Clara demanded answers, our mother didn't apologize. She smoothly explained that Clara's taste was too aggressive and that a young, professional woman needed a serene environment to attract the right kind of people. We stayed on the phone for 3 hours, sitting in our respective apartments, piecing together a lifetime of micromanagements. The favorite shirts that went missing in high school, the way our college dorms always seemed to have different bed sheets after our parents visited. It wasn't our bad memory, it was her. She had been quietly, systematically curating our identities for a decade, doing it so slowly and confidently that we just adapted without questioning it. "The move-in plan was never real, Leo," Clara whispered. "Think about it. If she told you I was moving in, she had a perfect excuse to completely gut your apartment all at once without you fighting back. Meanwhile, she was doing the same to mine. If we hadn't caught her, she would have eventually invented some reason why I couldn't move into your place after all. And by then, she would have had 2 perfectly redesigned, sterile apartments that fit her exact standard. It was a brilliant, terrifying strategy. She had used our lack of communication against us, playing us like pieces on a board to build her own version of our lives. That night, the dynamic between Clara and me shifted forever. We weren't the distant siblings our parents had kept apart through subtle competition. We were survivors of the same quiet house. Clara told me she was changing her door codes the next morning and demanding a full inventory of everything our mother had taken over the years. The retaliation from our parents was instantaneous and explosive. My father called me at 7 a.m. the next day, his voice shaking with fury I had rarely heard. "What did you do, Leo? Your mother is in bed, sick with grief. You took a family misunderstanding, dragged it in front of all the relatives, and now you've poisoned your sister's mind. She's locked us out of her apartment. You've turned her paranoid." "She's not paranoid, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "She just saw the tape, and she looked in her own closets." "You're your mother," he shouted. "Everything she does is because she cares about how you two present yourselves to the world. You are ruining this family over furniture." "We're not ruining anything," I replied coldly. "We're just taking our keys back." I hung up before he could answer. Clara and I texted a few minutes later. We agreed on one thing: no more hiding, no more separate arguments. We were going to face them together.
Clara and I chose a quiet, dimly lit diner at the edge of town for the meeting. Neutral ground. No family heirlooms on the walls, no home court advantage for my mother. When we walked in, our parents were already sitting in a corner booth. My mother had already placed a pristine pack of tissues on the table, her classic staging for an emotional defense. My father sat stiffly beside her, looking like a man preparing for a corporate mediation. "I'm glad we're sitting down like adults," my father began, his voice carrying that practiced, reasonable tone. "This whole thing has been a massive misunderstanding. Your mother only wanted to—" "Dad, stop," Clara said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had an edge to it that made him pause. As a landscape architect, she spent her days directing construction crews. She knew how to command a space when she needed to. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a list of our new conditions. No spare keys, no unannounced visits, no gifts for our apartments. Total autonomy over our own lives. My mother immediately reached for the tissues. "Leo, Clara, you are breaking my heart," she whispered, her eyes shining with sudden, practiced moisture. "Everything I have ever done was to make sure you two had beautiful, respectable lives. Is it a crime to want my children to live in a nice environment? To want to help when Clara was struggling?" "I wasn't struggling, Mom," Clara said flatly. "You lied to Leo so you could gut his apartment, and you've been doing the same to mine." My father sighed, shifting his weight. "Clara, your mother has a specific way of doing things, yes, but she loves you. You're being incredibly harsh over a few design choices." Clara looked directly at him. The ambient noise of the diner, the clinking of coffee cups, the low murmur of other patrons, seemed to fade. "Dad, do you remember the vintage Canon film camera you brought back from your trip to Japan? The one you spent weeks tracking down because you knew I wanted to study photography?" A faint smile touched my father's face, a genuine memory breaking through his defensive posture. "Of course, it was a beautiful piece of machinery." "Ask Mom where it is," Clara said. My father turned to my mother, his brow furrowing. "Beatrice, you told me Clara packed it away in storage when she moved." My mother's face tightened. The fragile, weeping mother persona slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the hard, stubborn steel underneath. "It was old, Richard. The leather casing was peeling, and it smelled like damp mold. It didn't fit the clean, modern look of her new shelving unit. I donated it to a local charity shop and replaced it with a beautiful digital frame that holds 1,000 photos." The silence that followed was heavy. My father didn't explode. Instead, he seemed to physically shrink into his coat. He stared at his wife as if looking at a stranger. For decades, he had enabled her behavior, dismissing her control tactics as mere quirks or anxiety. But this was different. She hadn't just erased Clara's preference, she had erased his gesture, a unique token of connection between a father and a daughter, simply because it didn't match her visual spreadsheet. "You threw it away," my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I donated it, Richard. It's not the same. "Beatrice, be quiet," he said. It was the first time in my 28 years I had ever heard him speak to her that way. He looked up at Clara and me, the anger in his eyes replaced by a profound, hollow exhaustion. He reached out, took the piece of paper Clara had slid across the table, and folded it neatly into his pocket. "They're right," he said to her. "No more keys. We're done." That was 2 months ago. The immediate aftermath was quiet. My mother went into a deep sulk, refusing to call either of us, but the silence wasn't hostile anymore. It felt like safety. Surprisingly, my father started texting me on Sunday mornings, just simple notes about football or restaurant reviews, but it was a relationship built on his own terms, not filtered through her. Clara and I hang out every week now. We go to dive bars, listen to loud music, and talk about our childhood with a clarity we never had before. We are no longer competitors for our parents' fickle approval. We are a team. Tonight, I came home from a brutal 10-hour Saturday shift. The apartment was exactly as I left it. The blinding white LED bulbs are long gone, replaced by the soft, warm amber glow of my old lamps. My turntable was spinning a dusty John Coltrane record, the low saxophone notes filling the small space. I stood at my stove, heating up my heavy, beautifully blackened carbon steel skillet. As I dropped a thick ribeye steak into the pan, the kitchen filled with the scent of searing meat, rosemary, and garlic. It wasn't a magazine-perfect space. It didn't have a color scheme, and there were no porcelain angels on the walls. It was dark, a little smoky, and entirely mine.